The cathedral bells of Vienna rang through the winter morning as Elise König stood frozen in her wedding gown, watching the man she had loved in secret for 3 years turn his back on her at the altar. Duke Sebastian Aldrich's voice cut through the chapel like ice. "Take off the wedding dress. This marriage is just revenge." The guests gasped. Elise's hands trembled against the silk of her gown, the cameo brooch at her throat suddenly feeling like a noose. Sebastian's dark eyes held no warmth, only the cold satisfaction of a man who believed he had won. "Your father destroyed mine," Sebastian said quietly. His words meant only for her. "Now I will destroy everything you hold dear." Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Viennese court whispered for days. The wedding had been arranged by the emperor's own decree, a union meant to heal old wounds between 2 noble houses. But Sebastian had other plans. He would marry her, yes, but only to humiliate her, to take everything her family name still carried, and then cast her aside. Stay until the end, because this story will show you how love can break through even the coldest walls of revenge. Elise had known the Duke since they were children at court. She remembered him as a boy of 15, serious and kind, who once helped her retrieve a fallen ribbon during a winter ball. She had been 12, mortified at her clumsiness, and he had smiled at her with such gentleness that she had never forgotten it. Then his father died in disgrace, accused of embezzling imperial funds. The family fortune was seized. Sebastian disappeared for years, only to return at 28, harder, wealthier, and determined to reclaim what was lost. He blamed her father, Count Franz König, who had been the imperial treasurer at the time. Franz had signed the documents. Franz had testified before the emperor himself. Franz had watched the Aldrich estate crumble without lifting a finger to help. What Sebastian didn't know was that Franz had died 2 months ago, broken and haunted, whispering apologies Elise didn't understand. In his final hours, he had clutched her hand and begged forgiveness for sins he wouldn't name. And what Elise didn't know was that her father had been forced to lie under threat of her life, a child's life bargained against a man's honor. The marriage contract was signed in the emperor's presence at Schönbrunn Palace. Sebastian's expression never changed as he wrote his name. Elise wore the cameo brooch her mother had given her the morning she died, a piece that had been in the König family for generations. It depicted a pair of swans, their necks entwined, surrounded by delicate flowers. The Dowager Duchess Aldrich watched from the shadows of the palace gallery, a slight smile on her thin lips. She had orchestrated this marriage through careful whispers to the emperor's advisors, through late-night meetings and subtle manipulations. Let the boy think it was his idea. Let him believe he was the architect of his own revenge. But she had other plans. Plans that required both of them broken, both of them desperate, both of them too distracted to notice what she was really after. The wedding ceremony itself was a torture. Elise stood at the altar in St. Stephen's Cathedral, the soaring Gothic arches above her head, the winter light streaming through stained glass windows. She spoke her vows in a voice that didn't shake, though inside she was breaking. Sebastian's voice was cold and measured. When the priest declared them married, Sebastian kissed her cheek with all the warmth of a business transaction. The wedding breakfast was held at the Hofburg Palace, a grand affair with the cream of Viennese society in attendance. Elise sat beside her new husband and smiled until her face ached. Sebastian barely looked at her. When he did speak, it was only to make some cutting remark disguised as courtesy. "My wife is very accomplished at pretending," he said to the Marquis of Salzburg. "A skill her father taught her well, I imagine." Elise set down her wineglass carefully. She would not give him the satisfaction of tears. The wedding night was silent. Sebastian had arranged separate chambers in opposite wings of his newly reclaimed Vienna residence, a grand Baroque house overlooking the Ringstrasse. The rooms assigned to Elise were beautiful and empty. No servants came to help her undress. No fire had been lit in the hearth. She managed the buttons and laces herself, her fingers numb with cold and something worse than cold. She wrapped herself in her traveling cloak and sat by the window, watching the snow begin to fall over Vienna, wondering how her life had come to this. In his own chambers, Sebastian stood at his desk, staring at a document he had kept locked away for years. It was the ledger page his father had supposedly signed, authorizing the false contracts that had brought down the Aldrich name. Even now, looking at it by candlelight, something felt wrong. The signature was too careful, too controlled. His father's hand had been bold, almost reckless, the hand of a man who lived with confidence, but revenge had consumed Sebastian for so long that he pushed the doubt away. He poured himself brandy and tried not to think about the way Elise had looked at him when she spoke her vows, as if she could see straight through to the boy he used to be. Morning came cold and grey. Elise woke stiff in the chair by the window. A maid finally appeared, a young woman named Greta, who looked at her with undisguised pity. "His Grace requests that you join him for breakfast," Greta said quietly. Elise dressed in a simple morning gown and made her way through the unfamiliar house. The breakfast room was elegant, overlooking a snow-covered garden. Sebastian sat reading a newspaper, his coffee growing cold beside him. "Good morning," Elise said. He didn't look up. "There is bread and chocolate. Help yourself." She sat across from him and poured tea with steady hands. They ate in silence. Finally, Sebastian set down his paper. "The Emperor has invited us to a reception this evening at the Hofburg. We will attend." "Of course. You will dress appropriately. You will smile. You will play the role of the devoted wife." "And what role will you play?" Elise asked quietly. His eyes met hers, cold and unreadable. "The role of a man who has everything he wanted." That evening, Elise, dressed in a gown of pale gold silk, her mother's cameo at her throat. When Sebastian saw her waiting in the entrance hall, something flickered across his face, too quick to read. The Hofburg blazed with light. Every window glowed, every chandelier sparkled. The reception hall was filled with Vienna's elite, all of them watching as the Duke and his new bride entered. Elise felt their stares like physical things. She heard the whispers. Poor creature. He married her to punish her family. It's quite ruthless, really. I heard he keeps her in the East Wing like a prisoner. Sebastian heard them too. He had made certain the rumors would spread. He offered Elise his arm with perfect courtesy and led her through the crowd, aware of every eye on them. The Dowager Duchess appeared at Elise's elbow like a shadow. She wore black, as she had since her husband's death, and her jewelry was all diamonds and ice. "My dear Countess," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey, "how brave of you to show your face in society after all your family has done." "I have done nothing, Your Grace," Elise replied quietly. "Of course not. You were merely born into shame. But that is how these things work, isn't it? The sins of the father visited upon the children." The dowager's eyes flickered to Sebastian, who was watching from across the room. "My son believes he controls this game. He believes his revenge is his own. But you and I know better, don't we? The real question is what you're willing to sacrifice to keep even the illusion of your dignity." Before Elise could respond, the master of ceremonies called for silence. The emperor wished to make a toast. The crowd turned expectantly, but it was Sebastian who stood, his glass raised, his face unreadable. "To my bride," he said, his voice carrying across the hall with terrible clarity. "The daughter of a thief and a liar. May she learn what it means to live with the consequences of her father's crimes." The room froze. The insult was public, brutal, unforgivable. Ladies gasped behind their fans. Gentlemen shifted uncomfortably. The emperor's face darkened with disapproval. Elise felt the blood drain from her face. The cameo at her throat seemed to burn. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, waiting for her to collapse, to flee, to give them the spectacle they craved. Instead, she stood. Her legs felt weak, but her voice came out strong. "To my husband," she said, meeting his eyes across the distance, "who has chosen revenge over truth and bitterness over honor. May he one day find the courage to seek what he has been too afraid to see." She set down her glass with a sharp click and walked from the ballroom, her head high, her heart breaking with every step. Sebastian watched her go, something unfamiliar and unwelcome twisting in his chest. Around him, the whispers exploded into full conversation. The Emperor was glaring at him. His mother was smiling. He had won. So why did it feel like losing? The next morning, Elise woke to find a letter slipped under her door. It was unsigned, written in an elegant hand she didn't recognize. "Your father was innocent. The proof exists in the Imperial Archives. Section 7, Fiscal Records 1808. Look for the seal, but be careful. You are being watched." Her heart pounded. Could it be true? Or was this another trap, another way to humiliate her? She dressed quickly in a simple walking dress and cloak. The Imperial Archives were housed in a wing of the Hofburg Palace, open to scholars and nobility with proper credentials. She still carried her father's signet ring, which would grant her access. The streets of Vienna were cold and beautiful in the morning light. Snow clung to the Baroque facades, and the smell of roasting chestnuts drifted from street vendors. Elise pulled her cloak tighter and hurried on. The archive clerk was an elderly man named Herr Brenner, who had known her father for years. His face softened when he saw her. "Countess König," he said sadly, "I am so very sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man." "Thank you," Elise said. "I need to see the fiscal records from 1808, the Aldrich case." His expression changed. Something like fear crossed his weathered face. "Those records were sealed by imperial order, my lady." "Please," Elise said. "I just need to understand what happened." Herr Brenner looked at her for a long moment. Then he glanced around to make sure they were alone. "Wait here." He disappeared into the stacks and returned with a leather folio, yellowed with age. His hands trembled slightly as he set it on the desk. "I shouldn't do this," he whispered. "But your father begged me to help you if you ever came. He made me promise." Elise opened the folio with shaking hands. Inside were the documents from the Aldrich scandal, testimony, witness statements, financial records, and there, her father's formal testimony against Duke Aldrich. She read it carefully. The language was stiff, formal, not at all like her father's usual style, and at the bottom his signature. But next to it, pressed into the red wax seal, was a crest she had seen before. Not her father's official seal. A personal one, smaller, with a distinctive design. A raven over 3 stars. The Dowager Aldrich's family crest. Elise's breath caught. Her father hadn't authored this testimony. He had been forced to sign something already written. The seal proved it had been prepared in advance, in the Dowager's own chambers, with her personal seal. "Herr Brenner," she whispered, "did my father ever speak to you about this case?" The old man's eyes filled with tears. "Once, near the end. He was dying, and his conscience was heavy. He told me he had been forced to lie, that the Dowager Aldrich had threatened to harm you if he didn't cooperate. You were only a child. She had sent men to your nursery. Let them be seen by your father. That was all it took. Why didn't he tell anyone? Who would believe him? The Dowager was untouchable, and by the time he might have found the courage, he had his own debts, his own troubles. She made sure of that." Elise carefully noted the document reference numbers and the details of the seal. "May I make copies?" "No," Herr Brenner said, "but I can have the documents examined by the imperial solicitor if a formal inquiry is opened. Keep this." He pressed a small card into her hand. "This is my testimony, written and sealed. It states what your father told me. Hide it well." Elise thanked him and left the archives with her mind racing. She had proof, or the beginning of it. But how could she use it? The dowager was powerful, connected, ruthless, and Sebastian hated her too much to listen. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the figure following her through the snowy streets. That afternoon, Sebastian sat in his study, trying to work through correspondence, but his mind kept returning to the expression on Elise's face when she had stood before the court and defended herself. There had been no self-pity, no weakness, only a quiet dignity that had somehow made him feel smaller. His butler, Herr Klaus, knocked softly. "Your Grace, the Dowager Duchess has arrived to see you." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Show her in." His mother swept into the room in a rustle of black silk. She examined the study with a critical eye before settling into a chair, uninvited. "You've done well," she said. "The girl is properly humiliated. The court sees her as she truly is." "And what is that?" Sebastian asked. "A König, worthless, tainted by her father's crimes. She had nothing to do with what happened. She carries the name, that is enough." His mother leaned forward. "But you're weakening, Sebastian. I can see it. Don't let sympathy ruin what we've built." "What you've built," he corrected. "This was never my plan." "Wasn't it? You came to me seeking justice. I merely helped you achieve it." Sebastian stood and walked to the window. Did my father really steal those funds? Of course he did. Then why can I barely remember him as anything but honest? Why does his signature on those documents look wrong? His mother's expression hardened. "Grief plays tricks on memory, Sebastian. Don't question what you know to be true." "I'm beginning to think I don't know anything anymore." The dowager rose. "Then let me remind you, the Königs destroyed this family. They took everything from us. Your father died broken because of Franz König's testimony. That girl sleeping under your roof is the daughter of your father's murderer. He died of grief, mother, not murder." "Semantics." She moved toward the door, then paused. "I hear your wife was at the archives this morning. Be careful, Sebastian. Desperate women do desperate things." After she left, Sebastian sat for a long time in the gathering darkness. His mother's words should have strengthened his resolve. Instead, they planted fresh doubts. That evening, when Elise returned to the house, she was exhausted and cold. She went straight to her chambers, not expecting to see anyone. But she found Sebastian in the hallway outside her door, as if he had been waiting. "Where were you today?" he asked. "Walking," she said carefully. "I needed air." "The servant said you were gone for hours. Am I a prisoner now?" "You're my wife. I have a right to know your movements." Elise looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the shadows under his eyes, the way his hands clenched at his sides. "Why do you care?" she asked softly. The question seemed to throw him. "I don't." "Then why are you here?" Sebastian had no answer. He turned and walked away, leaving Elise alone in the hallway, her heart aching. The days began to blur together. Elise spent her mornings reading in the library, her afternoons walking the cold streets of Vienna, her evenings alone in her chambers. Sebastian avoided her, except at formal occasions, and even then barely spoke. But things began to change in small ways. One evening, Elise came down with a chill from walking in the snow. She tried to hide it, but at dinner she could barely eat. Sebastian noticed. "You're unwell," he said. "I'm fine. You're shivering." "It's nothing." But by midnight the chill had become a fever. Elise burned with it, her body aching, her throat raw. She tried to get water from the pitcher by her bed, but her hands were shaking too badly. She didn't hear her chamber door open, didn't hear Sebastian's quiet footsteps, but she felt the cool cloth on her forehead, felt strong hands helping her drink. heard a voice, low and worried, calling for the physician. For 3 days Elise drifted in fever dreams. She saw her father, young and whole, smiling at her. She saw her mother, pinning the cameo to her dress. She saw Sebastian as a boy, offering her a ribbon with that gentle smile, and through it all she felt someone there, sitting by her bed, changing the cloths, holding her hand in the darkest hours. When the fever finally broke on the 4th morning, Elise woke to find Sebastian asleep in the chair beside her bed. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his face exhausted. She watched him sleep and felt something shift inside her chest. He woke to find her eyes open and clear. "You're better," he said, his voice rough with relief. "You stayed. The physician said someone needed to watch you. You could have sent a servant." Sebastian stood abruptly. "I'll send for broth. You need to eat." "Sebastian." He stopped at the door but didn't turn. "Thank you," Elise said softly. He left without answering, but his hands were shaking. Elise recovered slowly. When she was strong enough to walk again, she found Sebastian in his study one evening. "May I come in?" she asked. He looked up from his papers, surprised. "If you wish." She entered and stood awkwardly near the door. "I wanted to thank you again for taking care of me. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing to me." Silence stretched between them. Then Elise took a breath. "I went to the archives," she said. "Before I fell ill, I found something." Sebastian's expression hardened. "What kind of something?" "Proof that my father was forced to testify against yours. Proof that someone else orchestrated the entire scandal." "Who?" "Your mother." Sebastian laughed bitterly. "That's absurd." "Is it? Look at this." She pulled out the card Herr Brenner had given her and set it on his desk. "This is sworn testimony from the imperial archivist. My father confessed to being threatened, and the documents bear your mother's personal seal, not my father's." Sebastian picked up the card and read it. His face went pale. "This could be forged," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It could be, or it could be the truth you've been too angry to see." Elise stepped closer. "I'm not asking you to forgive me or my father. I'm asking you to consider that we might both have been used by someone who wanted us to hate each other. Why would my mother destroy her own husband? I don't know, but I intend to find out." Sebastian stood and paced to the window. Vienna glittered below, cold and beautiful. He felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "If this is true," he said slowly, "then everything I've done was based on lies," Elise finished, "and we've both paid the price." He turned to look at her. In the lamplight, she looked fragile but unbroken. The cameo at her throat caught the light. "I've been cruel to you," he said. "Yes. I humiliated you in front of the entire court. Yes. Why are you telling me this? You could use this information to destroy my family completely." Elise smiled sadly. "Because I'm tired of revenge, and because somewhere under all that anger, I still remember the boy who picked up my ribbon." The next morning, the Dowager paid an unexpected visit. She found Sebastian and Elise in the library, sitting together, papers spread between them. "How domestic," she said coldly. "Sebastian, I need to speak with you, alone. Anything you have to say can be said in front of my wife." The Dowager's eyes narrowed. "I see. The little fool has been filling your head with lies." "Are they lies?" Sebastian asked. He held up one of the archive documents. "This bears your family seal, Mother, on testimony supposedly written by Count Koenig. Seals can be forged." "Can they? We're taking this to the Emperor's solicitor. Let them determine what's real." The Dowager's composure cracked. "You don't know what you're doing." "Then enlighten me," She looked between them, calculating. Then her expression turned vicious. Your father was weak. He would have ruined us with his gambling debts and his poor investments. I did what was necessary to protect our family. The admission hung in the air like poison. You destroyed him, Sebastian said, his voice hollow. I saved us. The embezzlement charges allowed me to seize control of the estate, to pay off his debts without anyone knowing how desperate we were. Franz König was simply a convenient scapegoat, and he was too cowardly to refuse when I threatened his precious daughter. You threatened a child. I did what needed to be done, and I would do it again. The dowager straightened her shoulders. Now you can choose. You can expose me and drag our family name through the mud again, or you can be silent and we can all move forward. You killed my father, Sebastian said, his voice breaking. You let him die thinking he had failed, thinking he had dishonored us. I gave him peace. I gave him a clean death instead of debtor's prison. Sebastian looked at his mother and saw a stranger. Get out. Sebastian, get out of my house. You're no longer welcome here. The dowager's face twisted with rage. You'll regret this. I have friends at court. I can destroy you both. Try, Elise said quietly, stepping to Sebastian's side. But we have the truth, and we have each other. What do you have? The dowager looked at them, standing together, and for the first time fear crossed her face. She left in a swirl of black silk, her threats echoing in the hallway. But that afternoon, her next move came. A summons arrived from the Emperor's court. Elise was accused of forging documents and attempting to corrupt imperial records. A warrant had been issued. She was to appear before a magistrate within 3 days or face arrest. She's fast, Sebastian said grimly, reading the summons. What do? We fight, but we need more proof than just Herr Brenner's testimony. They spent the next 2 days gathering evidence. Sebastian went through his father's old papers and found letters, receipts, records that didn't match the official story. Elise returned to the archives with the Emperor's permission and found more documents with the Dowager's seal where they shouldn't be. And Herr Brenner, brave old Herr Brenner, agreed to testify officially before the Emperor's council. The hearing was held in a grand chamber at Schönbrunn Palace. The Dowager sat on one side, surrounded by her allies and her expensive advocates. Elise and Sebastian sat on the other, with only Herr Brenner and the truth. The Emperor himself presided, his face grave. The Dowager's advocate spoke first, painting Elise as a desperate woman trying to clear her father's name through deception and forgery. Then it was their turn. Herr Brenner testified about Franz König's deathbed confession. He presented the original documents with the Dowager's seal. He explained the timeline that proved the testimony had been prepared before Franz had supposedly written it. Sebastian presented his father's letters, which showed growing concern about his wife's spending and her strange insistence on controlling their finances. He presented gambling debts that had been paid off mysteriously after the scandal, using funds that supposedly no longer existed, and Elise spoke simply about her father's last days, about his guilt and his fear, about the way he had begged forgiveness without being able to explain why. The Emperor listened to it all. Then he called for an investigator to examine the seals under magnification. The result was clear. The Dowager's personal seal, pressed into wax 20 years ago on documents that had destroyed 2 families. Dowager Duchess Aldrich, the Emperor said, his voice cold with fury, you stand accused of fabricating evidence, coercing testimony, embezzlement, and manipulating the imperial court. How do you answer? The Dowager stood. For a moment her mask slipped, and Elise saw genuine hatred in her eyes. Then she smiled. I did what was necessary to survive in a world that gives women no power. My husband was weak. Franz König was weak. Even my son is weak. I regret nothing. The Emperor's expression hardened. Then you will have time to reconsider your choices. I strip you of all titles and lands. You will be exiled from Vienna, from Austria entirely, within the week. You will live on a small pension in Bavaria, and you will never return to court." Guards moved forward. The dowager looked at Sebastian one last time. "You were always too much like your father," she said. "Too soft for this world." "Perhaps," Sebastian replied, "but I would rather be soft than cruel." They watched her led away, and the weight of years seemed to lift from both their shoulders. But the emperor wasn't finished. "Your marriage," he said, turning to Sebastian and Elise, "was contracted under false pretenses. It was built on lies, manipulation, and revenge. By rights, I should annul it." Elise's heart sank. After everything, after all they had discovered and faced together, would they still be torn apart? But Sebastian stepped forward. "Your Majesty, I request that you don't." The emperor raised an eyebrow. "Oh? My reasons for marriage were wrong. My treatment of my wife was unforgivable. But I would like the chance to make it right." He turned to Elise. "If she'll have me." Elise looked at him, this man who had hurt her and saved her, who had been broken and was choosing to heal. "I will," she said. The emperor smiled. "Then I grant you both a new beginning. The Aldrich estates are fully restored, the König name is cleared of all dishonor, and your father's reputation posthumously rehabilitated, and I give you my blessing to build a marriage based on truth rather than revenge." 1 month later, they stood together in a small chapel, just the two of them and a priest. No court, no spectators, no obligations except the ones they chose. Elise wore a simple gown of ivory silk, and Sebastian pinned the cameo at her throat himself, his fingers gentle and sure. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Then spend the rest of your life becoming the man who does," she whispered back. They spoke their vows in quiet voices, and this time, when Sebastian kissed her, it was with tenderness and real love, the kind that had grown slowly from ashes and forgiveness. That evening, they held a small celebration at their home. Just a few close friends, good wine and music. Sebastian led Elise in a waltz in the same ballroom where he had once humiliated her. "I'm sorry," he said as they danced, "for all of it. I know. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I'll hold you to that." He smiled, and it was the smile she remembered from childhood, warm and genuine and free of bitterness. Later, they stood together on the balcony overlooking Vienna. The city spread below them in a sea of lights, beautiful and cold and full of possibility. "What will we do now?" Elise asked, leaning into his warmth. "We'll live," Sebastian said. "We'll forgive ourselves. We'll build something real. We'll travel. We'll support causes we believe in. We'll be happy." He turned her to face him, his hand gentle on her cheek. "And we'll never let anyone make us forget that the greatest revenge is to choose love over hate." She kissed him as snow began to fall over Vienna, soft and clean and new. And for the first time in years, both of them felt free. The cameo caught the lamplight, the swans entwined forever, a symbol of two souls who had found their way back to each other through darkness, through pain, through forgiveness, and into light. Subscribe for more soul-stirring stories, where every word holds a piece of truth.